Thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. Just a little more introduction. Before I joined the staff in the National Center last year, I spent 15 years as a judicial educator at the Supreme Court of Ohio Judicial College, developing education for non-judicial court personnel. And so I've had the opportunity to become familiar with the topic. And this is actually Emily's full-time thing. So, of course, she's the director at the Center for Court Innovation. You want to say?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. The Center for Court Innovation is a nonprofit based in New York that works on a variety of topics, of which procedural justice is one. But we've been really honored to work with ICM and really court administrators around the country. I see a few in the audience here that we've worked with on this topic, and so we're looking forward to hearing from you all about how this area is resonating with some of the work you're doing on not just the access to justice as was mentioned, but really thinking about how the user is perceiving that access, which is at the heart of this topic. So thank you all so much for coming.
Great. And we'd just like to get a sense, could you raise your hand if you consider yourself to be somewhat familiar with procedural justice? Okay. Now go ahead and keep your hand up if you would consider yourself very familiar. Okay, great. All right, well, we're going to look forward to the conversation throughout the day, and let me just walk you through what we're going to be talking about. We'll touch on research related to procedural justice. We'll give you some examples, and we look forward to hearing examples from what you're doing in your courts. We'll talk about education and assessment resources, and also as part of that information sharing, we are going to look forward to hearing from you about initiatives in your courts. And I'm particularly interested in knowing what kinds of information are you interested in learning about, above and beyond what we talk about today, and what would be most important for your staff to learn about.
Great. Okay, so the hard work starts here. We're going to just do a quick exercise. So procedural fairness is discussed in court settings, and even more broadly within the justice system, from policing all the way through to corrections and reentry, but really it's a human nature concept that's rooted in psychology research. So it applies to all of us in our daily lives. For those of you who are somewhat familiar with the topic already, you may have thought through this. For me, as I've been doing this work, I'm now plagued by the burden of kind of rating procedural justice and experiences I have with my cable company, with the IRS, my doctor's office, and some of them rate better than others. So just to get us kind of warmed up, we thought that you all might consider a time where you've been in the layperson's shoes, and that might be, again, in a medical context. It might be at your local DMV needing to get a license renewed, but try to think of something recent, and often the very good and the very bad experiences are what stand out in our minds. And think about what influenced that experience. What are the things that impacted the takeaway message that you had? It might have been the environment. It might have been the point person that you worked with. Were they respectful? Were they not? Did they treat you maybe like you should have known more than you did? Those are some of the feelings that we want to conjure up or have in mind when we're talking about this topic.
All right.
So again, I mean, just to tee up what the definition of procedural justice is, how we wish we had been treated is essentially what procedural justice research has found. So when you go to the doctor's office, you expect, even if you are not a medical professional, you expect to have some sense of what's going on, right? You want to know basically what just happened to you and what you're supposed to do next. You want to be respected by those professionals and feel that they treated you with dignity, particularly in maybe a situation where you're not feeling very dignified. Maybe you're in the hospital gown or such. You want to understand how they make decisions. So if the doctor orders a certain course of treatment, you want to know that they're using their best judgment in that, and that's really tailored to you as an individual. And then lastly, ideally, you would have some voice in that process, right? If you have questions, did the doctor rush right along, or did they pause and she give you an opportunity to say, what was that third, 10-syllable word you said? Can you tell me more about that? Or do you have a handout that maybe I could take home and read more thoroughly? So again, those are the things that we'll keep in mind as we go back into our professional lives where we are the experts and the people we're interacting with are those lay people who are expecting these same things.
And to continue framing the topic, we're going to be kind of thinking of two different perspectives. As professionals, what do we want at work? And so that's really broad, but it could include things like job satisfaction. We want to be safe at work. We want to improve the administration of justice. We want to do justice. And then there's another group. What do the court users want? And really, what we're all, spoiler, we'll jump in here that being treated fairly is really the key thing. We might think it's more about winning and losing, and we'll talk about more of that in a minute. But what we want to do is align our goals, and so that both of the needs get met for both groups.
Great. Okay, so our basic working definition, which it looks like at least half the room already knew coming in, is procedural justice is about the perceived fairness of the process. There's some nuance there, right? We do want the system to be actually fair. That's important. But procedural justice is about whether that's perceived by people, right? It can be fair, but if it's not perceived to be fair, that matters in this context. And as Margaret said, this is different than that kind of win-lose scenario that, especially for the lawyers in the room, are so used to thinking in terms of, which is also called distributive justice. And so it's contrasted against that, and we'll talk more about it in a minute, but distributive justice, or that win-lose, yes, is important, but it's actually not the most important factor when litigants and court users are rating their experience with the system and yielding other benefits, which we'll get to. Okay, so if you can click one more.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you. We had hidden information. So as I mentioned in the example at the doctor's office, there are 4 key elements. And depending on which research you read, sometimes there are 5, sometimes there are a different 4, and really there are many. The experts have found that there are many factors that influence perceptions of fairness, but essentially there are 4 or 5 top most influential elements. So these are a good kind of cheat sheet for you all going forward. So as I mentioned earlier, they're respect and dignity. This is one that most of us can get on board with right away, right? Who would disagree that people coming through our courts deserve respect? But as you can probably imagine, there are lots of things that get in the way with them perceiving that respect. And we'll talk about some examples in a minute. Feeling like they understand the process. That's so closely tied to so much of the access issues we talk about, which get at actual understanding. And so often as we're working in this topic, as we work to improve perceptions of understanding, we are improving actual understanding along the way. If you identify a part of the process that's confusing and maybe perceived as confusing, usually you're going to remedy the perception and the reality at the same time. So you get kind of a double benefit. Third is that voice piece. And this one we can find, I think, very challenging, especially for those of us who work in very busy, high-volume courthouses. It takes time to slow down and give voice to people. So we want to be realistic about what are the ways that we can do that efficiently but meaningfully. And then lastly is about neutrality. So feeling as though decisions are made by neutral actors. This is another one where, especially with an audience of judges, they say to me, well, it's my job to be neutral. Of course I'm neutral. But if you're not perceived to be neutral, you don't get to check off this box. So we have to think about ways that we can overtly show that decisions are made neutrally and without bias. And particularly for certain communities, it's important to be very deliberate about that. And we'll talk about more of that in a moment.
Great. And on the, when I saw the title on the slide, Why Do People Obey Court Orders, it immediately reminded me of a story from a speech given by the late Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Thomas Moyer. I'll just read just a little excerpt. We had an exchange program with Ukraine for many years, and so a judge in Ukraine asked Chief Justice Moyer to describe the size of the police force we employ to enforce our judgments. That question came from a judge in a country in which no one expected judges to be impartial or act independently of the wishes of the president or a member of the LaGratta, their parliament. And Chief Justice Moyer answered that courts in America don't employ police forces to enforce their judgment. The expectation of our citizens is that while not perfect, the American justice system resolves disputes by a process that's guided by fundamental principles of fairness and impartiality. And so, talking about people believing that the justice will be done, that the environment will be neutral and fair, is really impactful.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we can't talk about procedural fairness without giving credit to Tom Tyler, who's one of the fathers of this concept. He's currently at Yale Law School, and he wrote a famous book called Why People Obey the Law, which sort of shifted the paradigm, especially in criminal justice, of not why do offenders offend, but rather, well, most of us do obey the law most of the time, so what's unique about the rest of us? And that's where he landed on this idea of legitimacy and procedural fairness, that if you trust government, you're more likely to do what that government is asking of you. So the theory assumes that people understand that they can't always win, right? So that win-lose paradigm kind of only gets us so far. So in cases particularly that many of us deal with, people who are maybe going to have an unfavorable outcome in their case. They'll have to pay a fine on one end, or have very serious consequences on the other. There are still ways to have that experience improve their perceptions of fairness and actually increase their likelihood of compliance and other benefits, which I think we'll get to in a moment. Okay, so this is the only graph I'll show you, but I like it in that it contrasts the distinction that I made earlier, that win-lose factor, which here is shown as blue, so outcome favorability, did I win or did I lose, is far less predictive of whether or not someone will comply with a court decision than the green bar, which is procedural fairness. And it's not even close, right? So it really does go against some of our instincts that that might say that it's hard to take an unhappy customer and have them do what the court is asking of them. This research shows quite clearly that in fact we can, in that kind of interpersonal experience, we can take that unfavorable outcome and lead to decision acceptance or compliance. Okay, so some other benefits. So obviously if we're increasing compliance, we're getting lots of other wins for the court. So again, for those of you who feel like you have too many cases coming through, compliance of course means fewer returns of those on that immediate case, hopefully fewer returns of that individual going forward. So small investments of time on the front end, the argument is that you're going to see it in savings on the back end. And this has been tested in other criminal justice settings as well, which we won't discuss here today. But there actually are documented reductions in recidivism, violence, etc. So it's pretty powerful and is part of, I think, why this idea is getting so much attention.
All right, well, Emily set me up because she said she only had one chart for you, and now I'm doing the stats section here. But this is fascinating. I know you'll be interested. You may know about the poll that the National Center has done for the last few years, State of the State Courts. And so this slide is fascinating because it shows in 2012, 14, 15, and 16 the answers to 4 key questions related to this topic. Those are, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? That courts treat people with dignity and respect. We're pleased to have seen that rise 11% since 2012. And so 76% of those polled believed that in fact was the case. They agreed with it. We had just a small raise in the number of people who believed that courts were unbiased, 58%. 66% in 2016 believed that courts listen carefully to those appearing before them. And of course, that's that's the judicial officers and court personnel. And then over the last 4 years or 5 years, we've had a 10% increase in the number of people who think that courts take the needs of the people into account. So we're pleased to see increases that more and more people are agreeing with these statements, but certainly we'd like to see them, those numbers even be higher. But wait, there's more. This data is from last year's State of the State Courts poll, and really encapsulates what we've been, the groundwork we've been laying so far. Regardless of the outcome, were you satisfied with the fairness of the process? And so again, these are very encouraging, starting in 2012 with 68%, now we're up to 78% again of those polled. It's about a 1,000-person sample that received the poll calls. And so certainly we're happy that 78% of those polled reported feeling satisfied with their experience. Now we're going to look at this kind of a different way. You can see that Gallup performed a poll and asked about rating the honesty and ethical standards of people in these different fields. And you'll see that, you'll see the judges are kind of right in the middle. Nurses had the highest rating, grade school teachers right underneath that, and medical doctors. Judges right in the middle of the group. And if you can't see the slide, or the lowest rated were state office holders and members of Congress. So it's certainly, we're happy to be where we are, kind of in the middle there, but like that to go up as well. All right, and so we know that we're there at work, at the court, doing our best to improve the administration of justice, to ensure that justice is done, that justice appears to be done. But that is not assumed by many who come before us. They may be distrustful, and we have a chance every time someone comes and goes through securities, every time someone comes to the clerk's office or goes into the courtroom to earn that trust. We're going to go back to the State of the State Courts again, and this is from the 2015 poll, and talk about one of the questions. These are the same questions I mentioned before about treating people with dignity and respect, being unbiased, listening carefully, but you'll see that there are two sets of responses. The burgundy responses are the overall response of the entire about 1,000 member sample, and then the numbers in blue, there was an oversample of African Americans who get the opinion of the African American community on these kinds of questions. And it's disheartening to see that the numbers are lower. For example, in the overall sample, 66% felt that courts treated people with dignity and respect, only 50% in the African American sample. And so there's a difference anywhere from 10 to 20%, of lower belief in or agreement with these statements. And so, as we have all been watching the news, this is something that may, seem kind of nodding as we look at those statistics. But it's in light of this topic, it's so important to keep it in mind that we're truly earning that trust with every interaction on the phone, in person, in the courtroom, et cetera.
Right, and just to add, the research has shown that while baseline perceptions of racial and ethnic minorities are consistently lower, the strategies are still the same. So if you were to look at that chart I showed you, that relationship of the importance of procedural fairness and the elements that are important, it looks the same when you control for different racial groups. So it's just something to keep in mind, that you're able to apply procedural justice or procedural fairness approaches, and you can hopefully kind of raise the water level for everyone, including those who come in with much lower baseline assumptions.
And so as I was mentioning, we all have a role to play, and so you may ask which court professionals influence perceptions of fairness most. And we're going to hear now from Russell Brown, court administrator at the Cleveland Municipal Court in Ohio, on that topic. Okay. we will see if we can get that to come up. In short, I'll do my Russell Brown impression that certainly, and I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, we all have a role. Certainly, kind of the judges are the front and center in the court, but again, at every checkpoint, from security to clerk's office to stopping a court staff in the hall and asking where something is, it kind of building a chance to make that impression at every point along the way. And this slide shows us that the judges are very influential. Defense attorneys are influential, but you are right there at number 3 with prosecutors in terms of your impact on the impressions that are made by all of us at the court.
Right, and a lot of the studies that have been done have focused on just the courtroom experience. So keep in mind that many of the studies didn't look particularly at all of those, contacts at the window, the clerk's office window, or even incidental asking for directions, things like that. So it's not picking up on that. So we show this not to say that there aren't many people in the courtroom that are important. If you're a judge, remember this slide. But if you're not, keep in mind that it certainly holds true for all of those interpersonal contacts that may just not have been teased out in some of the studies yet. Okay, so we want to show you some examples from the field. And this is always the fun part for me because I can showcase the horror stories and the great examples from around the country. And so as we've done this work, we've been in dozens of courthouses helping them to examine what's working well in terms of improving perceptions of fairness, and then what are some challenging areas, the roadblocks to delivering this. And I can promise you that, at least in my experience, no courthouse is immune from having things that are impeding perceptions of fairness. Every courthouse has its blemishes, whether they be kind of physical, tangible, or a particular agency that maybe isn't in lockstep with some of the others in their philosophy about addressing court users. So anyway, we'll move through this quickly because I know we want to get to our next exercise. So we'll let these sort of speak for themselves, but what I want you to keep in mind is that a lot of these are about signs, which you might think are literally superficial, but they are a way that our courts message to court users. So there could be the most friendly, respectful, clear, helpful clerk or person who's going to help someone next. But when a court user enters this room and that's their first impression of the court process, they're already forming an opinion about the type of service and experience they're going to get. All right, and so we just saw one example of a nonverbal message, that signage with the subtle suggestion of printing the name. And of course, we all have those nonverbal cues as well. I'm thinking of an example Marcus Frankenmeyer from Maricopa County shared with me, that they had someone come in to kind of evaluate and see what the court user experience might be like. And there was a particular judge on the bench. That person was diligently taking notes, not sure it was handwritten or on the computer, but they were really putting some attention on that, really recording a lot to give them information to review later. And the feedback from the public was not, oh, thank goodness they're paying so much close attention. Like, are they doing other work? Is it Sudoku? What's, they just weren't sure about that nonverbal cue. And so that's something important to consider. All right. So again, as Emily said, these somewhat speak for themselves, but perhaps not the most welcoming. This one, to state the obvious, not so easy to read, and even if you can read it, not so clear exactly which department is which and how to find the different folks. But now there's hope. We're going to have some good examples coming up. And what I love about the last one, I love a few things, but we don't have time to go into all the things I love. But bring someone with you to court who has never been in the courthouse or who hasn't been there recently. It might be mom or your brother-in-law. and have them go through the process as a lay user and see if they can find your office, or see if they can find first the restroom and then, courtroom 112. Because the people who work in this particular courthouse walk by this sign every day and probably think nothing of it other than that, oh, how lovely, we have a directory, but it's completely unusable, right? And so it takes that reminder that for people who don't instinctively know where to go because they've been coming there the last 13 years as a staff member, it flags those things for us, including other nuances like, handicap accessibility. If you were that type of user, if you're a non-English speaking user, if you are that mother with the crying child, is there a restroom that has a diaper changing table? All of these scenarios, try to have them play out with someone particularly who doesn't work within the building. Okay, so some uplifting examples, which are not perfect, but things that we've worked with some courts on. To just be as clear as possible, use images in addition to language, particularly where you have many different non-English languages that are spoken in your courthouse. Labeling key areas of the courthouse very clearly. It took a lot of a lot of cajoling to have such a bold and simple sign here with this court that we worked with, and yet it's unmistakable what happens there, right? Whereas before there was a court seal, and if you had a magnifying glass, you could see in the seal that there was something about the clerk's office. But we just made it very, very user-friendly. In this courthouse we worked in, the court officers were fantastic. But we were worried that court users coming in might see someone in uniform and their gut reaction is, I'm intimidated by people in uniform. So we wanted to think of ways that we could give other cues to those court users. This is different. Ask our court officers questions. They're prepared to help you. They see it as their job to help you navigate the building and answer questions about the paper you have in your hand, etc. Flagging resources that you have on site, I think, is really important. Many courthouses have things like a children's room or like other government services that can be accessed in the building. Shout that from the mountaintops, right? Think of ways that you can advertise that from the lobby to the elevators and at other key points. Because even if it's not relevant to every single court user, it sends that message that the court is there to serve the people and be respectful of the time that they're spending there as well. And then lastly, just other things, welcome signs, check-in signs. Again, these may seem somewhat trivial, but again, when you invite your brother-in-law into the courtroom, get his impression. Does he know what the judge's name is? Does he know why the door is locked at 12:15 when you told him to meet you for lunch there? So things like hours, things about the closest restroom, those are very easy wins. And again, just communicate that respect that the staff are already doing in their interpersonal interactions.
And now we're going to move on to some statewide examples. What you see on the slide here is from the Arizona courts, and it's a really succinct list. The top half is things that the court staff can do in terms of answering questions. Bottom half is what they are not able to do. So we know that this wouldn't necessarily satisfy everyone. They might still feel like they have an unanswered question, but it really goes a long way to provide reassurance and information that it's not that, of course, we're being unhelpful. It's just that there are guidelines by which we need to abide. There's another great example from Alaska. This is a pledge of fairness touching on listening, responding to questions, allowing them to have a voice, and also treating court users with respect. And so you are seeing half of the page, but it's translated into the common languages in Alaska, and this is available on the Alaska Judiciary website. I encourage you to take a look. It's a great resource.
And of course, it's not enough to just have the pledge. You'll need behaviors to show that you're actually acting upon them as well. But I think it's a meaningful step where often in a lot of places you are doing that. The people who work there would say that that is part of their job to deliver those things. So calling it out and hanging it with pride, I think, is meaningful.
Absolutely. What you have on the screen here is actually an interview question for a referee position in Multnomah County, Oregon, and I'll just read it in case the text is small in the back. Please provide your judicial philosophy as it pertains to procedural fairness, and give an example of how you have used procedural fairness tools or observed a judicial officer using procedural tools to good effect. Now, this is part of a list of questions that is on the website, so someone applying for a position like this would be able to take a look, and so it's kind of a twofer, not only allowing them to prepare and give a complete answer, but it'll also tell something about the initiative. If someone comes in and says, procedural fairness, what's that? You know, we know that they haven't taken advantage of a resource that's right there. And I thought that was a great way to, you know, as you have someone new joining the court, to kind of see where their philosophy is. All right, this is a subsection from a probation document, and they did a great job of really using plain language. I'm going to give you one example because they're saying whether the probation is concurrent or consecutive. And so it says if you're already on probation in another case, the time you've already spent on probation in the other case from today's date on will count toward the period of probation ordered today, and then the word concurrent in red. And so they did a great job of really simplifying the language, and so the person taking this with them would have a good chance of understanding more what's expected of them. They also, in the entirety of the form, they moved away from pulling language from statutes, because that's something, of course, very common to do, easy to do, because you want to pass on the essence of that message. But you know, often it's not as understandable. In another slide or two, we'll talk about why that's so important. And so in a study of, you know, not surprisingly, had increased levels of understanding for folks who were receiving these forms. All right, so here's a word tip. This may be something that you've come across already, but there's a tool within Microsoft Word that you can just, with a couple of clicks, by going to File, then Options, then Proofing, and you see on the screenshot here exactly where you'll click to get that information. It'll evaluate your text and let you know at what grade level. And so let me just give you a few statistics about why this is important. So 50% of American adults can't read at an 8th grade level. 45 million are functionally illiterate. And this Flesh readability statistics tool will allow you to get at the ideal level, which is around 6th grade or below. And just try it on a memo or even an email that you send. You might be surprised how sophisticated you are as a writer, and how that grade level really climbs quickly.
When we help jurisdictions evaluate their practices, looking at the readability level is one of the things. And with very few exceptions, all of the things that we check for, whether it's forms or even just like a simple handout that someone jotted up, like a flyer to give directions to some other offsite office, they're almost always at a college level or above. So we're not doing a great job at this yet. And again, it's one of those examples where in trying to improve the perception that people are understanding, we are going to end up improving that actual understanding as well, so access. So really valuable. Okay, so we wanted to highlight, we're going to talk more at the very end about some of the resources that each of our organizations have to help you talk with your colleagues about this, et cetera. But for other specific courtroom examples, we do have a YouTube page that's available. There's that little bit.ly URL, or you can access it from the courtinnovation.org website. But we taped judges in live court exhibiting model practices. And so you can look through and see, you can rate them yourselves and see whether they're touching on those 4 elements. But it's another way to just get some ideas about how these examples can play out in real life.
Right, and we're right on schedule. We'd like to open up the conversation and hear from you when doing some brainstorming, and you'll have a slide popping up in just a minute, but I'll let Emily start the conversation with talking about examples in your courts and questions you have.
Great. So in our experience, especially the people who opt into coming to this session, you're already doing these things, right? So Margaret and I very selfishly want to hear your good ideas so that we can include them, and the next time we talk to other jurisdictions that don't yet have those good ideas. So we're going to spend a few minutes just in pairs, and we want to have you brainstorm some very specific examples that come to mind that match those 4 elements we talked about. So thinking about ways that you yourself, or maybe your staff, how do you demonstrate respect? Is that in a greeting? Is it in how you answer the phone? And if it is an example of how you answer the phone, we want to hear, well, what is it? What do you say? Do you say criminal court, which is what a lot of places say, or do you say something else? We're going to, I think the next slide, maybe we're having technical difficulties. We'll remind you of what those 4 elements are, but I'll remind you right now anyway. So turn to a nearby neighbor and see if you can come up with at least one concrete example between the 2 of you for the 4 elements. So respect, understanding, voice, and neutrality, or the perception that decisions are made neutrally. So we'll give you about 5 minutes to chat among those, and then we'll be soliciting some examples from the audience. Okay, so maybe one more minute. That would have put it. Okay, so let's come back. We're eager to hear from you.
Still on?
It's on.
Okay.
If everyone can come back to the front, I'm glad you've made new friends. We can continue that hopefully after. So maybe just kind of taking this in sections, because I know each one will be rich, but we're eager to hear from as many people as possible. Anyone from this area willing to, we'll start over here. I think that's where the mic is. That was silly planning.
And we will ask you to use the mic so the folks at home can hear the question and the
We'll get to you guys next. So how about on this far side of the room? Anyone willing to share some specific examples that you came up with?
We had a very good presenter that came over. Please share here.
I am Abdullah from Abu Dhabi court. Actually, we have some practice in customer service. We have a methodology should any staff which provides service to the customer take a course from 3 months and cover this old methodology. Then after he pass, he has ability to give information and give service to the customer. And also we have inspection visits to all branches in Abu Dhabi that reflect the efficiency of these courts and how the customer care implemented in this court.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm so glad you brought up the efficiency piece as well, which I know we've hinted at. But I think strategies that are honest about efficiency challenges while also addressing procedural fairness is a very realistic pairing, so that we're sure that we don't treat one as more important than the other. Because it is true that while efficiency is important, especially for us as professionals, it's actually not the most important thing to court users, right? They'd actually rather have it take a little longer to get that procedural fairness piece. So I think it's good to keep them both in mind. Thank you. Anyone else from this area up front? Concrete practices? No, how about from the middle? Yeah, great. Just wait for the mic.
Hi, my name's Tom Barr. I am the elected circuit clerk in Greene County, Missouri, which is in Springfield, southwest part of the state. So I came into office in 15, and I hadn't been part of the courts before. So the first thing I came in, the first thing I looked at was in the lobby was a stack about this big of all the cases on that day. So what we had, the people would have to stop there, thumb through to figure out where the courtrooms were. So I was able, within about 7 months, I had some funds available. We actually put up signboards, which not only would tell the case number, defendant's name, the judge, and the division, but in between that, we actually had a map of all the floors, and we put exactly where the divisions were, and we also had a thing that said, hey, if you can't find your name up on the board, come up to the second floor to the clerk's office and we'll help you.
Nice.
So,
And those were digital boards,
Yeah.
monitors?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, technology can be such a
right,
great
so
tool.
now, we did that, and now we're in the process. I've got 20 judicial officers there. They have all decided now that they want one of them in front of their courtrooms, because now they just, every day the bailiffs just throw up, 5 or 8 or 10 sheets of, depending upon their caseload. So it's going to be, so hopefully this time next year, I can report we'll have a full digital court. So that's,
Very nice.
That's a good thing.
That's
Thanks.
great. Well, so for those of you who are thinking, well, I don't have a technology budget, and because when you do, it's fantastic, and we've seen so many great examples of courts like that. But we're working in the Manhattan Criminal Court right now, and they do have a kind of digital sign plan. But in the meantime, even just labeling, clearly labeling those printouts and some kind of guidance about how to interpret that like dot matrix printout from the 1970s that gets taped up every morning, clearly label it court calendar or today's schedule, right, are some of the the innovations we've come up with. But again, kind of give a patch before we can maybe get to some of the more sophisticated implementations like that one. Thank you. What else from this section? Yeah, first here and then in the back.
So my name is Tracy Ewing, and I work for the Fort Worth Municipal Court. And one of the things that we have had the opportunity to do is partner with our mental health resource for our county. And we are actually putting every single one of our staff through mental health first aid, so that as people come to the counter, we know everybody could be at different points in their life, and regardless of whether you are a diagnosee or if you are just having a breakdown because you're having to come in and deal with courts, that they're able to recognize signs. And so every single person who either has phone contact, who has counter contact, and judges included, and throughout the city are actually getting this mental health first aid training. And then the other piece of that is that we're also not sending them back through customer service training. We're actually sending them back to do some emotional intelligence training, because in realizing that whole idea of we're all about us, so is the person on the other side of that counter, and how you can kind of get through those things.
Those are great tips. Yeah, I mean, we consistently hear kind of a lack of, either a complete lack of training or a lack of appropriate training as a challenge, just, in the court management realm. And so being creative about resources that are in your community is really smart. I think there was one in the back too. Sorry, Rick. That's all right. Getting his workout, his fun run here this afternoon.
Hi, I'm Susan Richmond, and this is Annalisa, and we're from Alaska. We're rural court trainers and administrators in Alaska. One of the things that we developed with our court, in Alaska we are a very diverse state. In Anchorage alone, we speak 99 different languages. So being understood and having our customers come in is very difficult. Most people aren't bilingual, let alone multilingual. So we have a map of the entire world that people can point to, so we can find out where they're from. Then we have a flip book to figure out what language that they speak, so that we can get a language line interpreter and actually communicate with them. And we have that throughout the state.
That's great. I love the map. I haven't seen that before. Thank you. Send me a picture.
Okay.
We'll put it in the best of slide deck. Was there anything else? Yeah. They're just toying with you now, Rick.
Yes, I'm Melissa Ruiz. I'm from the DC Superior Court. Recently, we have the problem that I work in the civil division, and every branch in the division has a different concept of what customer service should be, and it differs. And every branch has a completely different way, and we were having the problem that we were giving not the best customer service and not to the highest standards and not accordingly to the values of the court. So when it comes to neutrality, I know the whole court has been doing a good job giving courses about implicit bias, but our director decided to create a committee in which at this moment we are working on a protocol for customer service, and it's being delivered. We are creating right now. It's in the final phase, but we are delivering one to every employee. That one, when it comes to neutrality, will include how to identify implicit bias, what bias are they using, also how to handle difficult customers. We give them strategies like, okay, you are going to listen first, you are going to apologize later, then you are going to emphasize, you are going to take action. So we are going to give them steps so they can remember how to deal with those difficult customers. Also, we standardize all the greetings for all the branches. So everybody should be saying the same thing when they answer the telephone. No, like, when they answer their telephone, when they are in the windows with the clerks, everybody should be saying, basically they have some guidelines. They are going to say their names, and it will tell them how to open the conversation and how to finish the conversation. And also they will be required to give some surveys to all the employees we have. We always had our comment cards, but we created new comment cards, which when it comes to reading them, it will be easier for them, and we're going to be producing new comment cards to help people to understand better, because the language that we had before, it was too complicated for them.
Gosh, there's so much there.
I'm sorry.
No. And before I lose the thought, so does anybody else have comment cards in their court? Yes? Does anyone read them? Does someone read them, I hope? We'll get to that in a minute, but that's huge, right? That's voice. So even if you can't give that meaningful voice in every single interaction, that's another outlet for them and gives you really good information about what improvements still need to be made. So I love that.
Also,
do you have another?
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
A part of the comment cards, it shows respect for them and for their voice. We are giving them voice for them and how they want to be treated. So all that information is inside of that protocol that every employee is to receive.
Yeah.
Coming soon. We already trained the supervisors, and the employees are being trained, but yeah.
Good, great. And I love too how anticipating the challenging customer, has anybody tried to come up with either protocol or advice or something for that? That's a type of obstacle which you probably are not going to get rid of, right? There are people who don't want to be in court. Maybe they're a large majority, in fact, but coming up with strategies which everyone is clear on of what you do in those situations to give them also those 4 elements, including respect and voice and how to appropriately redirect them if they seem to just need to go on and on. Those are really smart things that we've heard are very useful. Okay, so our last section before we need to move on. Thank you so much for all these great ideas. So, who over here? You've had a lot of time to think, so you should have the best ideas, no pressure. What do you have? How do you answer the phone? Will someone tell me how you respectfully answer the phone, or have your staff answer the phones? Anyone have any good advice on that?
It's a voice menu.
It's a voice automatic. It's a voice menu, but what does a voice menu avoid, right? It avoids the phone ringing and ringing and ringing, right? Somebody always picks up. That's a good thing. The New York courts, don't call them because they don't answer the phone. God bless them.
I can see this.
Yeah.
The probate division for the DC Superior Court, now I speak loudly, so I probably shouldn't be in the mic. We have now, everyone, including the deputy clerks and case managers, we have an audit system now where it automatically goes to each phone. Like, we have to log in every morning, and you have to log in by a certain time, by 8:30 when you arrive. And what happens is the phone will ring from the main number, and then it'll just go to whomever logged in first, and then after that one, then it passes on. So no one gets a chance to not answer the phone. We all are doing customer service at this time, and we have to push log out when you're away for lunch, but then we have to log back in. But on the other side of that, our division head will be able to see who is logged in, what time we log out, what time we log back in, so that we're making sure that we are providing proper customer service and that everyone is now involved with answering the phone. So I think it was a good idea because you do have the same people that was answering all the time, and that was our deputy clerks who were being bombarded with live chat as well. So now everybody can be involved with providing customer service. So yeah, that's something
great.
new that we're doing. So it's just an automated system now, and you have to answer the phone or...
So
they'll see
more
when you
great
don't
examples
answer.
of how technology can give us a head start, right? And I pick on New York because that's where I'm from. But a lot of places, right, if it comes down to staffing issues, they're making tough decisions. Do you serve the person who's there at the window or the one calling in on the phone? And so those are tough things, but you know, as much as possible, trying to head on. Okay.
Wonderful. Well, I was thrilled to hear the theme running through the different ideas that were expressed, that education was so important. And as at ICM, of course, I believe that as a digital educator. In our ICM courses, we do make procedural justice a focus. I'm thinking of purposes and responsibilities of courts, the court tools course, also case flow. You'll see a lot about that. And you know, also throughout other courses as well. ICM is going to be offering a webcast later in September on Thursday, September 28th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Excuse me, that it is 3 p.m. I'm glad I can set the record straight. 3 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be sending out information on how you can join that. If this has sparked some thoughts for you about what you would most like your staff to know about procedural justice, and you'd like to kind of have a conversation about perhaps having that included in the webcast and also the online course that we're developing for release later this year, I have a stack of cards, and I welcome you to. I'd love to trade cards with you as you're on the way out. We have some more resources to talk to you about. This is a National Center resource at proceduralfairnessguide.org. You'll find some videos, both showing behavior of staff that honors procedural justice principles, and also a couple of videos of judicial officers. And there are also some lesson plans included with the videos, so that if you'd like to provide education in your court or in your state, that's something that you can do.
Great. So I'm not going to spend time on this, so I'll have Margaret just click through, but just know that we do have something called an evaluation toolkit on our website where you can learn more about how to measure change. So if you're going to implement some practices, get some baseline data so that after you make those improvements, you can show, hopefully, that there were improved perceptions and maybe even improved compliance if you can kind of pair it with some of the compliance data you have.
And on that same note, again, bringing up court tools, there's an access and fairness survey that many courts have undertaken to find out what the perception of the public is. And you can post your data and see others' data at courttools.org.
Great. So this is our wrap up. We want to have time for questions. The Court Innovation website, courtinnovation.org. Also, please come grab my card if you want to reach out. I love examples like the ones you've shared, and especially if there's like a little artifact that we can include as we're talking with other courts. I already told you about the YouTube page there. In addition, there's a 3-minute animated video, which provides kind of a 101 to the topic if you're interested in baiting some of your colleagues. It's the quick way to get them hopefully intrigued. We have some other resources. Actually, in that little snapshot, I'll call out Barb Marcial from the Multnomah County Courts. She and a couple of other folks helped us put together a book of interviews of practitioners who are practicing this every day, and it's called To Be Fair. That's available for free on our website. There's also a tape panel discussion you can view from that same YouTube page. So please check out the resources and reach out to me directly if I can be of further help.
And the same goes for me. You see some National Center resources listed, including research findings, podcasts, and just a note, you'll hear procedural fairness and procedural justice. We have the same site that you can get to by both addresses, so either proceduralfairness.org or proceduraljustice.org. And I echo Emily's invitation to be in touch should you have any questions or interested in talking more about education related to procedural justice.
Good. So I think we have a couple minutes for questions. Are there other, or just comments, other things that have come to mind? Pushback you anticipate possibly getting on this as you maybe would seek buy-in from your colleagues? Any of those things come to mind? Yeah, and I don't, oh, you could. Margaret has our mic.
Cheryl Bailey, District of Columbia Courts. One of the ways we received went for buy-in at our court, we started off with training, judicial education on this topic, along with our senior managers, all went through procedural fairness training. Then we rolled it down to our branch chiefs and supervisors, and now it's mandatory for all court staff. So we wanted to set the model first with judicial officers going through it first, and senior managers.
That's a strategy we've seen work well in other places too, so that's really wise. And I think Barb here had, is that right? Did you have a, okay.
Not so much a question, but an observation, and something that we continue to struggle with is finding the right balance between security and safety and procedural fairness. One of the things that we have done is redesign our public service counters so that rather than having glass dividers between the staff and the customers, we have no glass there, just partitions separating the individual counter spaces, but there's always a little bit of reticence about removing that glass, and what if people are sort of in my face and yelling at me, and I don't know if you have resources or if there have been any studies that document, we have tried it out and we have noticed a marked improvement in the customer service experience with the glass removed, so people aren't feeling that they need to yell to overcome the barrier, but it still is a struggle in convincing people that that is the way to go at our public service counters. So I don't know if you have ideas there.
And I think that is going to be the last word for our discussion, but we, of course, will be here and look forward to continuing it off camera. We want to thank you for being here, whether you're here in the room with us or watching the live stream, and invite you to be in touch to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.